Venice was once billed as California's Little Europe, a vacation destination developed at the height of the City Beautiful movement in California. There isn't much that remains of this original vision today, but these do. The Venice Canals. And whether you visited the canals, live along the canals, or have never even heard of them before, I have a feeling this video will change your perspective on all of them regardless. And that's because the origin story of Venice and its curious canals is way more interesting than you might have thought. See, it all starts along the southern end of the Santa Monica Bay. If you stood here back in the 1890s, all you would have seen is flat, marshy saltgrass and tidewater where Bayona Lagoon meets the Pacific Ocean. Of course, this was not yet the Venice of America. It was simply a strip of sand dunes and tide pools. But one man had a vision for it. Abbot Kinney, a tobacco magnate from New Jersey. Kinney's interest in the Southern California coast started when he took his first visit to a health resort in Sierra Madre to recover from asthma. And many affluent people of the time did the same thing, part of a national health seeker migration that actually drove much of early Southern California tourism. Kinney and others became convinced that sea air, sunshine, and recreation could form the basis of moral and physical improvement. Needless to say, Kinney fell in love with the region and bought over 500 acres of land nearby present-day Pasadena, where he then built a 2-story home and was intent on becoming a citrus farmer, planting 6,000 citrus trees and 20,000 seedless grapevines. But as any good turn-of-the-century businessman, Kinney was a jack of all trades. Along with being a farmer and an entrepreneur, he was also a land developer, and with all of his wealth, Abbot Kinney made it his life's mission to show the rest of the country, and even the world, what Southern California had to offer. Together with a business partner, Kinney co-founded the Ocean Park Development Company in 1893 in order to create a trolley-served beach resort just south of Santa Monica, a neighborhood we know today as Ocean Park, one of my favorite neighborhoods in all of LA. Kinney began building roads, homes, parks, piers, a bathhouse, and he even convinced the Santa Fe Railroad to extend its Inglewood line north to his resort. Ocean Park ended up being developed half as a residential project and half as a fun amusement park resort beach thing. He wanted people to visit, sure, but he also wanted them to stay. After all, there's no better customer than the one that returns. After his business partner passed away in 1898, Kinney took full control of the development company and made it his mission to keep expanding his coastal communal ambitions southward. He thought a larger scale innovation seemed fitting for a new development closer to the wetlands south of Navy Street. At the turn of the 20th century, Kinney was deeded even more land, and subsequently commissioned engineers to dredge and regrade the marshes here into a network of navigable canals, several miles long. Here, he built another small city from scratch, featuring a 1,200-foot-long pier, auditorium, restaurants, a dance hall, a hot saltwater plunge, and a long arcaded business street with Venetian architecture, and he would call it Venice of America. That commercial street, like I mentioned, developed over a century ago, even still today at least somewhat resembles that of Kinney's early vision, Windward Avenue. Portions of the original arcaded buildings still remain, Venetian columns and all. When I'm on the west side, I tend to like spending some time here. It's a great area to walk around in, eat some really great Southern Californian food, check out all the small businesses, engage with the local crowd. Most of the time, it's a great time. And also knowing you're at least partially surrounded by what used to be peak LA City Beautiful is pretty special too. However, one thing that's no longer here is this collection of original Venice canals, as Kinney envisioned them. See, the Venice canals that we're able to visit today made up less than half of the number of canals that existed when Kinney was alive. We're familiar with these 6 remaining canals today, just south of Venice Boulevard, but there actually used to be 13 of them. And over a century ago, this roundabout used to be a bathing pool in the middle of all of it. I'm standing here on Grand Boulevard, on ground that used to be the Grand Canal, the largest and widest of the original 7. But there was also Coral Canal, Cabrillo Canal, Venice Canal, Lion Canal, Aldebaran Canal, and Altair Canal, all flanked by narrow residential lots, promenades, and arched bridges. Where at one point in time, these canals provided locals and visitors a scenic way through the resort town that was Venice of America, now they're just some more car-centric side streets in a city famous for destroying almost everything that made it special. And although these canals are no longer here, I will say that many of those original old-growth trees and the homes that existed alongside them still are. Abbot Kinney's Venice of America was designed to be two things at once: a working drainage and land reclamation system, and a themed seaside resort community. Opening day on July 4th, 1905 delivered the full effect. Grand parades, Pacific Electric streetcars funneling crowds in from all across Southern California, gondoliers in striped shirts pulling families through the newly cut waterways. It was awesome. What Abbot Kinney did was build more than a one-weekend novelty. The resort's pier and restaurants were lively, electric lighting made everything feel modern, and Windward Avenue kept people spending money. And along the canals themselves, bungalow lots with boat docks kept the neighborhood livable, serene, and community-oriented. To Kinney, Venice was a proof of concept. Urban form could be poetic and slow the pace of life, encouraging people to walk or float at the pace of the tide, all the while still running as a modern resort economy. The perfect match for a magnate with a lot of money and a lot of value placed on the healing power of place itself. Through the early Roaring '20s, Venice thrived as a standalone city. Its local government managed public utilities. The economy Kinney built around the pier and the streetcars drew in visitors year-round, and things were going well for the most part. The town's identity, half cultural attraction, half beach suburb, gave it a pretty unique energy that a lot of people gravitated towards. But it also created a constant tension with the rapidly growing and motorizing city to the east, Los Angeles. The folks who lived in Venice of America weren't as receptive to the encroachment of the automobile and urban expansion as some other Angelenos and city planners. Abbot Kinney passed away in 1920, and almost immediately thereafter, Venice would begin to change. By the late 1920s, cars had become the defining urban force of LA, and to land developers, Venice's bridges and waterways were obstacles. Venice's municipal revenues began to falter, and its infrastructure decayed, and so, on November 25, 1925, the city voted for annexation into Los Angeles. Venice was now and forever just another neighborhood in the ever-expanding City of Angels, and Abbot Kinney never witnessed his experiment's absorption into the metropolis. Once under Los Angeles jurisdiction, Venice faced a new challenge that weakened its endurance. People wanted to pave it for cars. The canals were seen by many in this new age of car centricity as outdated and even unsanitary. City planners and engineers proposed draining and filling them to create through streets instead. In 1927, the city council authorized the filling of the northern canals. Local residents sued to block the project, but the California Supreme Court upheld the city's authority. By summer of 1929, bulldozers were dumping dirt into the waterways to fill them. Cabrillo, Venice, Altair, and the rest of the northern seven were all replaced by paved boulevards by 1930. After 1930, only the southern 6 canals were spared, and only because the city lacked funds to extend the assessments that far. Kinney's waterborne paradise had been sacrificed to the automobile he never designed it for. By the mid-30s, the remaining canals south of Venice Boulevard were stagnant, silty, and under-maintained. After all, if the city had the money for it, they'd be filled in. And it wasn't just the canals that were in poor shape. Boardwalk planks rotted, footbridges were condemned, and mosquito control teams had to come in and spray diesel on the water to prevent breeding. Venice of America was slowly turning into what many called the slums of the sea. Yet amid the decline, at Venice's lowest point, something interesting happened. People were rapidly selling their homes here, and apartments here were renting for dirt cheap. This combination attracted a new crowd to the neighborhood. Artists, writers, and mid-century era bohemians and hippies started moving into Venice in droves. Obviously attracted by a lower cost of living, and being walking distance from the ocean didn't hurt either. Decades of legal battles and engineering studies culminated in a restoration plan overseen by the California Coastal Commission. In 1991, the commission greenlit the rehabilitation of the 6 surviving canals using bank stabilization. Construction began in February 1992 and wrapped up by October 1993, costing about $6 million, a small price to pay to resurrect one of the most unusual historic urban landscapes in America. The city dredged the canals, fortified the bridges, added new lighting and landscaping, and reconnected the waterways to the tides for the first time in decades. The flushing system that the city installed operates via slide gates beneath Washington Boulevard, draining on the ebb and refilling on the flood, keeping the water clean and mostly clear around the clock. The neighborhood has evolved architecturally too. Early bungalows and 1930s cottages coexist with modern glass villas and contemporary-style homes. Walking along the canals today, you can see this rich tapestry of architectural flavors firsthand, and honestly, it's probably the thing that makes these canals somewhat worth visiting today. I say that with jest, because admittedly, the inevitable injection of autocentricity in a place built solely for humans and small boats has made the historic district a bit of a paradox to be in. Like, something's a little off. You should be able to walk around with ease, but at almost every turn, you're reminded that this is no longer a neighborhood that puts humans first anymore. Cars are abundant, and they feel very intrusive here, as they do in many other places developed before them. In my opinion, the Venice canals need a 21st century restoration of intent. Kinney's original design prized human scale and fluid movement, and the city could honor that by reclaiming space dominated by driveways, curbs, and parked cars, narrowing vehicular access to locals only, and converting the ugly, concrete-filled alleys and canal-adjacent lanes into shared slow streets would immediately return the balance of space back to pedestrians and cyclists. I think the Venice Canals Historic District would greatly benefit from more pedestrian paths, benches, historic plaques, and an overall urbanist refreshment. I think the remaining canals are suffering from a bit of no man's land syndrome. And by that, I mean the site really isn't promoted or marketed as a tourist destination or a must-visit, but visitors to the city always seem to want to check it out, and as they should. One of the biggest problems is that it lacks any kind of natural entrance. And as a result, you often have visitors driving around and even through the canals just to look for a legal place to park. Why not redevelop the surface lot built atop the northern branch of the Grand Canal along Canal Street into a proper visitor welcome center, complete with exhibits, restrooms, and maybe even a central green space or public square? It could humanize the experience for visitors while protecting the quiet residential character, if done right. I feel like time and again, Los Angeles has been determined to erase the very things that once made it special. Its streetcars, its unique neighborhoods and way of life, its sense of place, and the Venice canals nearly joined that list. The city was halfway there, but somehow they endured, shimmering beneath the same California sun that inspired them over a century ago. So go visit them, walk the pedestrian paths, grab a bite at the canal market, admire the architecture, and take in all that remains of city beautiful Los Angeles, while you still can. I'll see you next week, right here, from Fourth Place.